Hey, and welcome to the Hoppitarian Show. I am Shane. You can follow me on Twitter at the Hoppitarian, and please subscribe to our YouTube, BitChute, and Odyssey channels, and give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you listen to the podcast. And if you do leave us a written review, please tell us how much you love the Hoppa ethno-state. That will really help us out a lot. My guest today is Alan Mosley. How are you doing?
I'm good, Shane. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for taking time to be on with us today. So I wanted you on because let's get right into it. So one of your tweets, or actually two of the tweets that you had put out recently that I thought were pretty interesting, and maybe kind of talk about that for a broader topic, I think would be what I'm trying to say there. So the first one, and this one's more of a something that happened recently. So your tweet here reads, comment to get canceled by big tech today. If your child is being attacked and another person or persons is preventing you from responding to their plight, you are morally justified in removing them by any means necessary before turning your attention to your child's attacker. So basically what you're alluding to is, if people don't know, is that there was this shooting that happened in a school, and sadly, a lot of kids were killed, and I believe some teachers were as well. And the cops were called, but they didn't really do anything. They kind of were just standing around, and it was basically kind of one of those situations that make you go, so what's the point of having a cop? If you're supposed to protect and serve, quote unquote, then how come you're not trying to rescue these kids, whatever? Because I also saw some stories where parents, I think there's one mom drove I think it was 30 or 40 minutes away from where she was to do that, where she was trying to rescue her kids. I mean, that's insane, the fact that she had to do that because the cops weren't doing anything. So I guess what I'm basically trying to get at is that tweet that you're talking about. Can you kind of go over that and kind of where you were coming from with that?
Yeah. So first of all, that's the cleaned up version to an old meme from Veggie Fact that just says killing cops is the only way to get to heaven. That was my first instinct, but I did not go with that. I cleaned it up to say, essentially, if your child is being attacked and there's someone preventing you from getting to your child's aid, you are morally justified in removing that person by any means necessary. Now, obviously, for people with above room temperature IQs can kind of put two and two together what I'm saying there, but you can't be too on the nose on big tech, or you're going to get a knock at your door. But it's true, and I'm reluctant to even say to people like the old trope of, oh, put yourself in that position. Do you have children? What would you do if you were there? Because in some sense it's like I don't even say that, because you don't even want to think that. You don't even want to. I would never even want someone to pretend to have to be in that terrible, terrible position. And you were right. I think it was 19 kids and 2 teachers. And the reports that are out as of the time of this episode is the cops were called, and they essentially didn't respond for something like 45 minutes to an hour. And by didn't respond, I mean there were officers on the scene, but they had essentially barricaded the shooter in with living children, sort of treating it more like a hostage situation rather than an active shooter situation. So had that been a correct assessment that he's taken these children hostage, he's holding a gun on them, and he has some kind of demands, then that would have been perhaps one thing. Although I'm still not sure you would let that linger for 45 minutes to an hour while everyone runs back to the precinct to put on their fancy suits. But it wasn't a hostage situation. He was literally walking around shooting children. This was not this was not debatable. This was something that could not have been assessed by people on the scene. And of course, what do you get? You get the avalanche of excuses, right? Of, well, there was only a few officers, and I think a spokesperson for the department actually had the audacity to say, of, well, if they went in, they could have got hurt, so that's why they waited. And it's like, I saw somebody, I don't remember who it was now, but somebody had made the analogy of, but the officers on the scene, even if they only had their sidearms, they had guns and they had ballistic vests on. You know what the children had? Crayons. That's what they had to defend themselves with. And they waited outside for like an hour. So it's, to me, it's but more to your point, to the point of the tweet, is that's still not good enough for our boys in blue, though, is it, Shane? They couldn't just not do nothing. They actually didn't do nothing. They actually prevented parents from trying to rescue their children, which it led me to another tweet that I had made, which was, we've learned something about police this week and from instances before, which is, if they think you're going to shoot back, they're way less likely to cause problems. So maybe we should encourage a culture where the police think that they're going to get shot back at every time they mouth off to someone or knock on someone's window. I don't know. I mean, I know that that's really inflammatory language, so I'm going to get called a Fed. But the fact of the matter is that we have the receipts, right? We have the footage, we have images of these police tackling parents, tasing parents, pepper spraying parents, and the lady that you had brought up in question. So I think she drove from 45 minutes away, got caught by U.S. Marshals, and was handcuffed. She managed to convince them to release her. Something about, I guess she knew some of the officers personally, and they said, oh, she won't cause trouble, and they let her go. When they let her go, she literally goes around to like a side entrance of the school, hops the fence, goes in, finds her kids, and sprints out with them, gets back over the fence. Now, that's incredibly brave on her part. And the fact of the matter is that I'm sure more parents would have liked that opportunity, but they made the sad mistake of going up to the front doors where the officers were, tragically believing that they were there to serve and protect them. But of course, we know that that's not true. And I'll end that whole thing on this point. The last thing I said, kind of on this whole recent controversy, was if there's a silver lining to this whole recent shooting, it's that you have to fall into column A or column B. You either see the police as a government sponsored gang that has absolutely no duty to serve or protect you in any meaningful sense, or you think that the public at large should be disarmed and these people should be in charge of your protection. There's really no in between at this point. You believe one or the other. And frankly, after what we just saw, if you believe option two, you're just a lost cause. Like, there's no point in people like you and me trying to reach these people if you still think that after what we just saw.
Yeah, that actually leads to the next thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is how gun control, like you were saying, well, I don't want the citizens to have weapons or arms or whatever, but
Mm-hmm.
the government should totally have all the weapons to do whatever they're going to do with them. So another aspect about this that I've found to be to be interesting, and this isn't like the first time that's happened. There's been other instances that this has happened, and I mean, it's sad that it has to come to this where children have to die, but right wingers and conservatives who were back the blue, I love the police, I'll support the police, they
Mm-hmm.
should have all the funding or whatever. They're coming around to the fact that, yeah, maybe the police don't look out for my best interest. They don't look out to protect and serve me and
Mm-hmm.
the citizenry or whatever. And it's definitely a white pill. I think
Mm-hmm.
if people are starting to understand, and I'm not gonna be one of those like defund the police people or whatever. I'm gonna say how I feel about this is that, because I think it was the amount of funding that they were getting, I think it was like 40% or something like that of the city's budget was going to the police. I'm pretty sure. If that's the case, then obviously if they had gotten 41% of the budget, then this wouldn't have happened, right?
Yeah.
But it just goes to show that, because some people were saying, well, I mean, they have families they go home to. It's like, well, yeah, that's true. But so did the children that got shot and killed, and the teachers and all this stuff. And I think it's interesting because I look at it as, like, obviously I don't want the government to have the monopoly on violence. I don't want them to have the police, whatever. But I'm sure you agree that they're not going to go away tomorrow. So what are some things that could possibly improve it? I'm not 100% sure. I don't have all the answers, but I would say if the policemen had a better relationship with the citizens that they were supposed to be protecting, then I don't know, maybe the situation wouldn't have been as bad as it was. I don't know. Because clearly money isn't helping out. And I mean, I don't know, like, okay, so and I'm kind of rambling and going all over the place, but another thing that I want to say about this, that I think, because you're talking about how there's like two sides where it's either this one or that one. I've seen libertarians say, well, the answer is you got to abolish public schools. Okay, yeah, I agree, but how are you going to get there? Like, how do you well, if I become a president or whatever, if I become the mayor, I'm just going to abolish all of the public schools in my area, in my jurisdiction. But I don't know, just having that type of, like, just saying that as a solution is fine, but you're not telling people how you get there, because when you just say that, it's just like, and I was one of those people who used to be like, yeah, abolish public schools, like that's the answer. But now I'm kind of thinking a little bit more, I don't know how to describe it, but like a little bit more like, okay, how do we get to that point? You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? And I know that as we're sitting here talking, there's this clown show convention happening out in Reno, and we're not talking about that today. The only reason I brought that up is just to say that's the $1 million question for them and us and everyone else, isn't it? Is that now that you've done the thing you're doing, what's next? What's the thing you're going to do now? What are you going to do that's going to make actionable changes? But I will say, because I love to shit on them all the time, but I will say in their, or just generic Lawbert defense, if I may, is that you and I could sit here and we will. I can give you a short list of things that I would say if we did these things, and I think they're at least more realistic than me becoming president of the United States, these would move the needle forward. However, a lot of us have been around long enough to know that any list of things we come up with that would be a net positive, these aren't new ideas. These ideas have been around for years, if not decades, if they never come to fruition, because Leviathan's not interested in that. So even if our tactics are different, no matter who you are, and we could use the great Ron Paul as an example. Okay, so run as a Republican, get into Congress, instead of trying to fight the duopoly, work within. You know what? That's been done before too. And we don't exactly live in paradise. I'm not saying that it wasn't great that he did it. I'm not saying that it didn't draw a lot of people to these ideas, but it was the drawing of people to ideas was really the success there. It wasn't actually making actionable change, because Leviathan's not interested in actionable change. But more to your point, like, okay, let's talk real shop for a second, but not in complete fairy tale world of what could be done differently. So for one, we know that the police have no duty or obligation to protect us. That's been affirmed by the Supreme Court and held up several times in court. So so hoping for better officers, hoping for, more money, more training, more whatever, that makes absolutely no whit of difference whatsoever. Um, if this is one of the reasons why people would be against the state have a monopoly on violence and having police be the only answer to a problem like this, precisely because they don't answer to us. They're not going to suffer any negative repercussions for their actions should they fail miserably, whereas private security would. Um, but even that, even that's a step too far. Let's reel it way back into what generic lefties and righties would understand. First of all, repeal gun-free zone laws. Throw those out the door. Those are absolutely ridiculous. Gun-free zone just means target-rich environment. That's all that means. It's all it's ever meant. Um, the the second thing would be, if you're talking about specifically that town, and it's a small town. It's like 16,000 people live in that town. I don't want to get too hung up on this one example because it's a lot bigger topic than just this one example. But it is a good example. This one town is a town of 16,000 people, and yet that enormous percentage of their budget goes to their police force, and they've got these armored vehicles and SWAT teams, and they're just armed to the teeth. They are the true definition of militarized police. Something that we talk about at TAC all the time is you talk about asset forfeiture and equitable sharing, and how that then allows this huge exchange of money. By exchange, I mean stealing it from people, the feds getting it, and then sending a certain percentage of that back to the local municipality. That allows for this massive militarization of police. And what did that do to help those children? All that money and equipment and gear didn't do anything for those kids. So that can't, obviously, so you're right, that can't possibly be the answer. So getting rid of, like I said, getting rid of gun-free zone laws would be a help. Having a serious conversation, it's kind of like separating the serious from the non-serious. A non-serious conversation is, let's get rid of guns. That's a non-serious conversation. Everyone who advocates for gun prohibition to end gun violence, it necessarily requires gun violence to get rid of gun violence. That is just an abject fact of their position. So that's just inconsistent from the word go. We could sit here and talk about how, teachers could be armed and trained. And you're right. I'm totally on board with abolishing public schools, but you're right. We don't have a magic wand. We're not going to abolish public schools tomorrow. But I would say, again, I feel compelled to defend the Lawbirds as autistic as they are, is that it's not that their position is wrong. It's just not something that we have the means to accomplish right this minute, or perhaps even in our lifetime. I read just recently from our friend Michael Bolton that it's really disingenuous to talk about having these types of freedom in our lifetime. It's more realistic to talk about laying the foundation for future generations. We're not going to dig out of this hole tomorrow. But, private schools, if you have a private school and they have private security, they absolutely would be required. I mean, it would be a part of their job description to protect your children. You're sending your children to that school, but it also applies to the public school. This is probably one of the most damning parts of the whole school shooting, school violence equation, which is you can't send your kid to school strapped. That's a quick way for him to get sent to jail or expelled forever. You can't go to school with your kid and protect him. They're not going to, we see how they treat parents. We see how they treat parents outside there. We see how they treat parents at school board meetings. You're not going to be allowed in there to do anything. So, but the point is that we have to have a logical consistency there. And if your kid can't protect himself, and if you can't protect your child, but your child must go to school, in the scenario where we're not talking about homeschooling, they must go to this local public school, then that means the responsibility of your child's safety has now fallen upon them. That to put it nicely in a non let's go burn down the local precinct way, that's the issue that we're faced with this recent example. Is if you are not they have commandeered the responsibility of the defense of your child, which means they now own that responsibility. And then they also then turn around and failed at that responsibility. Therefore, in any sensible situation, someone must be to blame. Now, before anyone gets their feathers ruffled, yes, the gunman is to blame. That's the first person to blame, and that's never not true. That's never not true. It's not the gun. It's not necessarily anyone else. It's always the gunman first. But they still took your responsibility, your right to protect your child. They effectively stole that right from you. They now own that responsibility. They failed to do it. So there should be way less national conversation about how we're going to license and restrict firearms, and a way bigger conversation about how, if the state has commandeered certain responsibilities, that means they now own those responsibilities. If they're not fulfilling those responsibilities, then they are at fault. And at a minimum, those responsibilities should be returned to you. I'll add one more quick thing though before I turn it back over to you, because there's a million different examples we could bring up. Is you mentioned earlier that the right wingers that generally are seen as the copsuckers are starting to some are starting to wake up and say, wow, this is not what I have always envisioned when I've thought of the thin blue line. That I don't like what I'm seeing here, and that is a white pill, and that's great. Not that long ago, if you had told people, yeah, we're going to have some percentage of conservatism turning on police, I think a lot of people wouldn't have believed it. So that is good news. But and of course, there's been plenty of people on the left that have been anti-cop for a long time. But they have to understand it. They have to be able to reckon with it. There has to be a logical consistency there, and the consistency there would be, if I don't trust the police, and if they're not doing the job that they're sworn to do, which again we know that legally they're not, to protect my children because I can't, then I, as a parent, should absolutely be evaluating ways that I can restore those rights and responsibilities to myself. And I'll give you one more somewhat not realistic, but more realistic than, Dave Smith 2024, which is a lot of the problems we're seeing today started at I think it's 1979 or 1980 with the creation of the Federal Department of Education. Look, every state has a state Department of Education, and they've had one all along. It was with the creation of the Federal Department of Education, when federalism died and when the federal government took over the responsibility of education from the 50 states and started instituting curriculum, started instituting laws and regulations. Think people old enough to remember George W. Bush's No Child Left Behind and all that kind of garbage. That's how we get things like federal gun-free zone laws, because it's a federal law. Your local school can't just decide to throw those signs in the trash because the federal government instituted it. So while it's probably not the most realistic thing, it's at least more realistic than ending the Fed, right? Federal Reserve is abolishing the Federal Department of Education. Now, if you live in a shithole state and your state's Department of Education is less than ideal, then that sucks for you. But at least you can vote with your feet, right? But this is a perfect example where restoring federalism would at least help, not solve, but help some of the crisis that we're seeing, whether it's economic, social, cultural, or in this case, the matter of education and gun rights. Restoring federalism, getting rid of a federal Department of Education, and in my case, allowing the Tennessee State Department of Education, if it decides, well, we're going to have off-duty officers, although officers are shit. If we're going to have private security, we're going to work into our education budget a certain number of teachers that are going to be armed and trained in use of a firearm, that sort of thing. Would that solve these problems? I don't know, but it's at least an actionable change that we could foresee happening that could potentially help the problem, that doesn't trample on the rights of other people, is not counter to things like the Second Amendment, and works within the confines of what you sort of presented, which is, we're still going to have public schools. People are still going to be sending millions of their children to these schools every day. We're not going to be able to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Again, sad to say, and I'll shut up and let you take back over. Sad to say is that, again, none of these ideas are new. I didn't come up with these things. These things have been discussed for decades, and they haven't happened. So another part of the national conversation has to be, if every single time there's a crisis, it's harumph, ban guns, harumph, keep my guns, the conversation will never move forward, because we're not even broaching any of these genuine actionable changes.
Yeah, so something I wanted to add to that, because you mentioned George W. Bush, I looked up because someone had posted, I think it was like a Wikipedia screenshot of something about like this gun-free zone passage into law, and it was a Democrat who had introduced it, and then it was signed into law by H.W. Bush. So bipartisanship wins again.
Yep.
So I just wanted to add that little caveat to it. That was kind of funny. But then you also talked about arming teachers, and I was thinking, I mean, I don't know, because some of these teachers, I don't know if you trust them with the gun, if children don't have anything to defend themselves with, and the teacher decides, what, I don't want to teach anyone, I don't care. And maybe I'm going to like the ultimate worst case scenario, but I mean, I don't know, maybe that would be something that some parents would kind of be like, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that, because I don't know the teacher. I don't have a good relationship or good rapport with the teacher. I don't know. And then you hear some stories about teachers, kind of doing some disgusting things to children at the schools. You're just like, I don't know, teaching them some weird things. You're like, I don't know. So,
well, I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't trust the teachers to teach my children, much less protect my children from an insane gunman. But what I'm saying is that, but my feeling that, as you pointed out, my feeling that way, and even my keeping my kids out of the school, is not going to change the fact that teacher's going to go to work tomorrow with a million other kids.
Yeah, that's true. And also kind of talking about when you were mentioning homeschooling, or you weren't going to mention homeschooling, but like you kind of mentioned it, not talk about homeschool, but you mentioned it. That's what I was trying to say. That like homeschooling has been an uptick, especially with COVID and all that.
Yep.
But that's another indication where, just homeschool your kids. And I mean, we're planning on doing that with our children, homeschool our kids. But also at the end of the day, we, like you were just saying, we understand that there's going to be teachers who's going to be teaching however many other kids are going to go to that school, because a lot of parents, they don't have a choice, or they feel like they don't have a choice. Like, I had to put my kid into the public school system because it's just more convenient for me. I don't like both the parents working. And that's another thing too. Like when both parents are working and then you decide, I'm going to quit, you'll work, I'll homeschool. Like that's a really big change for some parents.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be a complicated issue. And when, like you're saying, when there's one side who says, just get rid of all the guns and no more shooting, but then it's like, well, I need to keep my guns because I have to defend the government from doing whatever they're going to do to me, or whatever, or they feel like they feel that way. Like, how would you even approach that? It's like with the abortion issue. Like, how would you, when one's like, end abortion, and no one's like, no, we got to keep abortion for reproductive rights or whatever. Those two conversations right there are just, I don't see them ending anytime soon. And it's always going to be both sides of the aisle are going to use that. I mean, I have my own opinions on that. Like, I definitely don't like abortion. I want it ended. And I definitely think you should have a gun if you feel like you need to have a gun, and you train and learn how to use it. But I also know that there's millions of other people who don't agree with me. So like, what do you do with that?
Well, exactly. So that's exactly what I was talking about a second ago, is that's why a restoration of federalism would fix a lot of these, at least societal and cultural issues. Jeff Dysted wrote an article fairly recently that was right after when the whole leak happened, where they were saying, "Oh, it looks like SCOTUS may overturn Roe v. Wade," and the article wasn't really even so much about that as it was about healthy federalism fixes this. The reason why you don't have a bigger push for people trying to restore federalism, in short, the overwhelming majority of things, as the Constitution is written, being handled at the state level, is because since we have not enjoyed federalism in any meaningful sense for many, many years, that essentially makes everything that happens at the federal level winner take all, right? If your president wins with 50.1% of the vote, or whatever, if you get a majority in the House or Senate, which ultimately then means that you can then appoint your Supreme Court justices, and the Supreme Court, of course, again, not serving the function that it was constitutionally delegated to serve, it's now a super legislature. The Supreme Court was supposed to be a court that oversaw only a limited scope of things, because again, the individual states had purview over the overwhelming majority of issues. But now, today, the Supreme Court is a super legislature that everyone defers to, including the president, the executive, and the legislative branches. And so, since you have this sort of winner-take-all system that is completely located, centralized in D.C., then it's totally natural for people to politic the way they do. They have to win. They have to get that ring of power, right? Because if they don't, then they're going to have other people's views forced upon them. Whereas in a federalist system, look, I think abortion is wrong. I don't think that abortion should be legal anywhere. But if abortion, because overturning Roe v. Wade doesn't get rid of abortion, that just sends it back to the states. That's all that does. Are they still going to have abortions in San Francisco? Boy, you bet they will. There is absolutely nothing I can do about that from here in Tennessee. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying I can do much of anything that happens in Tennessee either, but at least you can vote with your feet, and we're just going to have to agree to live in a world where people in Alabama are going to have to be content with Alabama being a state that is a reflection of their culture and values. And people in California are going to have to be content that California is a reflection of their culture and values, and not try to force those cultures and values upon the other. To be fair, quite frankly, it's the Californians way more likely wanting to enforce their values on the Alabamans, not the other way around. But I'm not even picking sides. I'm just saying that's what federalism is. We're going to have to agree to that system. And this will be a little bit of a controversial one too. Guns should be the same way. The U.S. Constitution was never understood to mean that because the Second Amendment says, thou shalt not infringe. That doesn't mean that your state can't infringe upon your gun rights, because that would be up to your state's constitution. The U.S. Constitution means that the federal government can't infringe upon your right to bear arms. So if we were truly understanding the federalist perspective, we would want to rip those things out root and branch, so that all of those issues return to the states, and then individual states could decide. Again, is that perfect? No. Would there still be abortions? Yes. Would there still be people going door to door taking people's guns? In that scenario, probably. In places I don't want to live, they would want to do that. It's not something that Milton Friedman used to say. Nirvana is not meant for this world. There's no system that you and I could come up with that's going to satisfy our sensibilities on our definitions of freedom and liberty, that would not still require what my friend Mike Meharry says is the LEOs, Liberty Enforcement Officers. Even if for you and I to get everything we want and to make everyone else do it, it would still require violence, because there are people out there that do not hold liberty as a primary political virtue and would not be happy with the way you and I would want to structure the world. So we're going to have to restore federalism, take the overwhelming majority of things out of the hand of the federal government, restore it to the states. Perhaps the overturn of Roe v. Wade would just be one small piece. I will add as a one small addendum to that, since you had talked a little bit about how people's minds have maybe been slanted a little bit during the pandemic era as well. Same rule applies. If there's a silver lining here, I'll give you a silver lining. If there's a silver lining here, because a lot of people as recently as the start of 2020 would have said federalism's dead. There's no point in fighting it. It's over. Incorporation doctrine's here. We're just going to have to go politic in DC because nothing your state says matters anymore. COVID taught us that federalism's not totally dead. And the way it did is that not every state was equal during the pandemic, were they? There were some states that you probably would have preferred not live. Even to this very day, some places are bringing masks back right now because cases went back up. And there were other states, I'm very thankful to say Tennessee was one of them, where they basically never had a state mandated mask or lockdown. Now, a state like Tennessee, for example, actually took federalism to the next level, to a state level, which was the governor said, I'm not going to require any of these things because that's not my power to do, but individual cities and counties could. Now, surprise, surprise, the bluest city and counties in Tennessee, Memphis, Nashville, Knoxville, they locked down and had masks. You know what? The other 98% of Tennessee there was nothing. I never wore a mask. I never wore a mask a single time. I've never worn a mask my whole life, and I'm never going to, other than Halloween. So I could enjoy that without an enormous hassle to my life because I live here. I would not have been able to enjoy that quite so easily if I lived in New York, could I? So you know what? Maybe federalism's not dead after all.
Yeah, I was just thinking, could you imagine if like the Supreme Court was in DC or whatever, and then the White House was in like Los Angeles, and then the Congress was somewhere like, I don't know, Dallas, Texas or something like that. They're like, okay, you have to go here. And then if you want to go here, you have to travel to Dallas. And if you want to go to there, you got to go to LA. I don't know. That'd be kind of funny if that was how it laid out. But obviously, like you said, they're all coagulated in one little area. So, yeah. So actually, you're kind of somewhat of a good segue, I think, to kind of the next topic that we can kind of talk about. And I don't even know if this is even a possibility, but so I kind of want to ask you, like, what does actually like getting back to normal look like? And when I talked earlier at the beginning, talking about the some of the tweets that you had tweeted, one of them was, I don't want to go read the whole thing or whatever, but you're kind of alluding about like what it means to get back to normal. So like, because like would that just mean what it was like pre-COVID, or like what does that exactly mean for some people? Like, do you know, or like from your experience?
Yeah, so you know what, I don't mind, because it's worth the reference to for me to look it up really quick and read it, because it actually, I know that there were people that kind of took it to talk a little bit about COVID, and I guess in a weird sort of way, I might have been a little bit, but it wasn't really necessarily that. It was just more kind of like one of my little life reflecting moments, based a little bit more on some hard times that a couple of my friends have been through recently. And let's see if I can I have to scroll down past all the cop hate to get to there it is. I found it. All right.
Well, as far as I know, the whole getting back to normal, I don't know if it originated during COVID or what, but I mean, you hear that a lot. Well, we just got to do this to get back to normal.
Well, so I think that concept has basically been around. It's like as old as time. So the thing, right. what I said is that after going through trying times, and again, I don't necessarily mean COVID. It could just be, you're just someone who's had some bad luck. Maybe you're out of a job. Maybe you're having a relationship problem. I mean, it can be anything, but I know the last couple of years have been hard on a lot of people. After going through trying times, many of us, myself included, have echoed the desire to get back to normal. But the older I get, the more I think that that's not really a thing. I don't think life gets back or forth from normal or not. I think it just kind of moves on. Normal in this context really means back to before, but there's no going back in time. That's the true tragedy of our condition. And what sort of, I mean, I can think of myself, like I don't want to like get on a big soapbox and talk about my my life or anything. But before I was a retarded late night show host, I mean, I've been a jazz musician. I've been a business owner. I opened a printing company when I was 21 years old and ran that for basically my entire 20s till I was about 28 years old. I've been a nonprofit of a theater, or a vice president of a theater-based nonprofit. I've done a lot of different things in a relatively short time, and there's some tough times mixed in there, segueing from one to the other. I mean, we've all been there, right? Like, we've all been doing our budgets and scratching our head at tax time, and like I said, relationships, whatever. So I myself have been in the position before of, man, things are really tough right now. I've got my rosy colored glasses on, and I'm remembering when before this moment, I thought things were better. I just want to get back to that. I'm 36 years old. I don't get to play music as much as I used to. Boy, if I could go back to being 26 when I was gigging more and stuff like that, if I could get back to that, I'm gonna get my guitar back out. I'm gonna work on my skills. I just win the lottery so that I don't have to worry about paying my bills anymore, and I'll get back to music. It's gonna be so much fun. But the thing is I don't think that's real. I don't think there's such, because you're not really thinking about getting back to normal. You're really thinking more of getting back to who you were and where you were at a different time. But that's not possible, is it? Even if things worked out great for you, it's still not genuinely possible to do it in that context. But I know that from a COVID perspective, a lot of people are thinking, I mean, God forbid you still live in an area where things are not 100%, it's, not clown world anymore. But whether you do or you don't, I think there's a lot of people who are thinking, again, I'll use myself an example. When the initial lockdowns happened, I mean, my old producer Blake and I, we ran a studio that I managed, and we did a lot of audio video work, DJing, going out to helping other people organize their events and stuff. The business is gone. It's dead. It's not coming back. A huge amount of our business was a lot of annual events. We used to do all the local, like the United Way does a Relay for Life, where it's like for breast cancer or cancer victims and survivors and stuff. And they would have these all over the mid-state in different towns and different counties. And we were the provider for a lot of those events. They're gone. So our business is gone, but those events are gone. They didn't have it in 2020. They didn't come back in 2021. They didn't come back this year. They're gone. Those committees have folded. The events are defunct. And it's tough for people. It's tough for people to think about what they've lost. It's understandable for them to be angry because they feel like this was stolen from me. The always the amorphous they ruined our business. They destroyed our events. They took our lives from us. They ruined me financially. They took these years from my life. They kept me from seeing my loved ones. You think of the horror stories of people that didn't get to see their relatives in their dying hours and stuff like that, or funerals, this, that, and the other. I actually had a friend recently whose mother passed away in Canada, and he's not vaccinated. And he had to go to the Canadian government to get an exemption to cross the border, where they would lock him in his hotel room with the exception of going to the funeral and then send him back over the border. That's still happening right now. That was like 2 weeks ago. And so with all of that as the landscape, I know people are thinking, I just want things to get back to normal. What is very hard for people, but will help them, at least psychologically, is to just accept that the people most responsible for all that ill are never going to suffer consequences for their actions. No one's going to arrest Anthony Fauci. None of those governors are going to Gitmo, as Michael Malice likes to say. It's just not going to happen. So for your own, just emotional and mental well-being, it'll be better for you to think less about it in terms of people getting their comeuppance and getting back to normal, and more in terms of what can I do to move on. Move on.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, that story you're talking about where they had to someone go across the border, lock them
Yeah.
up. Pretty much locked them up, really. I mean, yeah, it's a hotel room. Ooh, that's great.
That was this month. That was May. That happened this month, right now in 2022.
Jeez,
Yep.
that I don't even know what to say about that. That's ridiculous.
Yep.
I mean, the fact that it's pretty much, if it's not proven, it's pretty much like very plausible that I mean, I way back when I had Keith Knight on, we did the COVID test, not the COVID test, but the COVID map data
Mhm.
chart that Tom Woods came out with,
Yeah.
and it was like, I don't know, oh yeah, I'll pick this. Oh no, it's not. The numbers don't match up. None of this makes any sense,
Mhm.
and people will still pretend, or I don't know, they have this in their head that, oh my God, I might die from. I mean, yeah, it's that, like, I'm not going to say, and I'm sure you're not also going to say that COVID isn't some hoax or something like that. People have died from it, but at the same time, it's not going to, people are going to get viruses. Like, you can just get something, you're walking and breathing and something, but you don't know it's going to happen until later on or something like that. But I don't know. It's not like, because sometimes you would joke maybe about this, where I would take COVID more seriously if there were like dead bodies literally like all over the place. Like, you're walking in the city, you're like, oh man, it's dead. Freaking, I gotta get all these dead bodies going on from COVID. It's
Mhm.
killing everybody. But yeah, like people not going to funerals and all stuff. I read something that so someone's brother had died. I'm not gonna like name who they are. It's not like it matters, but maybe to kind of keep it private, I suppose. But their brother died, but they didn't go to, like, and the other brother, the older brother, didn't go to the funeral. And his reasoning, and I think it was like in late 2021 or whatever. And the reasoning was, some of the people aren't vaccinated, and some of them weren't going to wear masks. It's like, you're not going to go to your own brother's funeral because some people didn't want to, like, just go. Like, what's the problem? Like, yeah, you're going to send a video message.
Yeah.
That's great, but you're not going to actually go and pay your respects to your own damn brother. Like, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, I'm sorry. Like, come on. Like, if my younger brother had died from COVID, you bet, I don't care where he's at, you bet you I'd do my absolute damnedest to be like, I'm going to see, pays my respects, whatever. But like, the fact that he was vaccinated, like, oh man, that was another thing too about this whole thing. I thought it's like, these people are delusional. He was so proud of the fact that he was vaxxed like 3 times, whatever. He was about to get the next one, but then he died from COVID, and I'm just, 3 times it didn't work. Come on.
So there you go. We're like, I feel like we're trying to like introduce white pills in between all of our rants. So there's another silver lining right there. It's kind of the same. It's the same comparison as the one I made about the two sides of how do you see police after what happened in the recent shooting. COVID's the same thing. Is that when you've seen the data, when you've seen the trajectory of cases and deaths in the different states, when you see what they did to people, you see how they destroyed people's lives. You look at other places like Canada and Australia, New Zealand, places like that, where I mean they're just like mowing down freaking protesters over this stuff. When you see all that, when you like, it's kind of like what do you trust, right? Like when you see all the coverage on TV, do you remember all the way back in the very beginning when they were showing that footage from China where they literally did show footage of people just collapsing in the street? And we know today that was all bullshit. We know that. I mean, you could have suspected it then, but we know it was all bullshit. And so that's kind of like the red/white pill, right? That I feel. So you either like, again, and when I say the proverbial you, I'm kind of talking to just the generic normie. I'm not talking about like to libertarians or whatever, like just the generic normie. The generic normie you either see that it was all bullshit and the data and the cases and the jabs, it was, none of it adds up. The boosters, all that garbage. And then when you see what happened to people that dare speak out against the official narrative, when you see how the official narrative waxes and wanes, something that you would say one day that would get you permanently banned, and they would like call your boss to try to get you fired. 6 weeks later, that's on the CDC's website, right? So when you see all that happen, you can only believe one of two things. You can either see that there's that what we are regarding as the news, the media, the information coming out is a carefully constructed narrative to pursue an agenda, and that it is not legitimate, and therefore that it also then casts doubt on a great many other things having to do with the establishment. Or you believe these wise overlords genuinely had your best interest at heart, and that there's a million dead people in the state of Florida right now. I'm in Tennessee. I don't know. I can't see them, but I think that there's corpses just washing up when the evening tide in Florida. You either believe one or the other. And again, if you believe the second one, you're a lost cause. You and I don't need to waste any more breath on those people. There's clearly nothing anything can be said or done to persuade those people. And I'm not criticizing Tom Woods, by the way. Tom Woods is a friend of mine. He's been on the show several times. I love Tom. That website he did with the COVID charts was brilliant. However, and again, I'm like, this is going to come off bad and everyone's going to say I'm an asshole. I don't mean this as a criticism, but charts don't matter, because you're going to fall into one of those two camps. And if you fall into the prior camp of this is bullshit and I don't trust the government, then you don't really need the charts because you've already got it. And vice versa. The people literally to this very day driving around in their cars with a mask and a deflector shield because they're doing the fucking tunnel run in New Hope. Those people, there's no amount of charts you're going to send those people that's going to change their minds. Would you agree with that? There's no charts. That website would not change their opinion one bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I just thought it was interesting, really. I mean, yeah, I was already kind of biased, so I kind of went into it kind of expecting to know what was going to happen, but at the same time, it was just still kind of like, man, and I guess if I was on the other side where I thought, oh, COVID's going to kill me, this is it. Like, I have only like maybe a year left, possibly, because COVID's going to kill me or whatever. And you go and be like, well, they obviously must have manipulated the numbers or something. Like, I mean, the CDC still says, or the WHO or whatever. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And okay, so another topic that I want to go to, kind of switching here, kind of briefly want to talk about this because you're tweeting a lot about it. And so I know a little bit about it. I kind of read the guy's Substack post about it. So Freedom Fest, for those who don't know, is like it's basically like I would consider it a high-end Liberty conference type of thing. Like, think Pork Fest, but in an air-conditioned room, and also like more expensive, I suppose you could say, because I mean, God damn, the tickets. Oof. So yeah, I don't know how long it's been going on the top of my head. I don't know. But anyway, so they do this like film festival, a bunch of movies kind of playing or whatever. I think most of them are probably original films. I would think, not like, oh, we're going to show the Avengers, something like that. I'm talking about like documentaries, something like that. So this one guy, Jason Rink, I believe is his name.
Yep.
He had his film originally, it was accepted to play, but then due to some, I guess, pushback from those that he named, not by name, but just the places they work, like Cato and Reason, places like that. They're like, yeah, I don't feel comfortable having this movie play at this particular festival, because why does it care? Like, you don't watch it. Like, just don't sit there and watch it if you don't see it. But anyway, that's beside the point. But anyway, the movie was basically about Nick Fuentes. And so anyway, you can kind of go more into it if you like, kind of go more into the story of what happened there.
So Jason Rink, Jason was on my show just this past week, ironically, and it was right before all this big news kind of broke out. And first, I want to say, just for people that are not familiar, Jason is above reproach. Jason Rink is genuinely one of the good guys. He's been around the movement for a long time. He was an original hardcore Ron Paul guy out there supporting the campaign. He had back, I mean, at this point, probably close to like 10, 12 years ago, the 10th Amendment Center used to do these Nullify Now movement productions, and they did a movie called Nullification that featured all the usual suspects that you would expect, and the Tom Woodses of the world, Ron Paul, and that sort of thing. And that was really Jason. Jason helped fund and produce and direct those things. And fast forwarding to now, he became such a success that he had a very lucrative, day job, was doing video production and marketing for a lot of huge players, A-list celebrities like Academy Award winner type A-list celebrities, and huge companies like Ford and Aston Martin and Toyota and stuff like those are his clients. This guy's not just some random whack job from the street. And then to add insult to injury, more recently, when it came to him doing some of these documentaries where he wasn't making documentaries espousing his personal beliefs necessarily. He was trying to make documentaries that just more were covering things that maybe you don't get the whole story from in the mainstream, which you would think would be exactly the kind of thing that would be welcome in a film festival like Anthem, which takes place in conjunction with Freedom Fest. And really quick on that note, he's not a newbie to that. He actually won like one of the awards in the 2012 Anthem Film Festival at Freedom Fest as like the best libertarian documentary or whatever. And just last year in 2021, he was on the panel of judges picking the winners for last year's Anthem Film Festival. So again, this is not some random dude they didn't know, and so they just threw some nobody under the bus. This was somebody that was involved in this and had participated in this event multiple times. As another quick little, like, more recent background on Jason is he first got into trouble because he had made a documentary called Q Sent Me that was talking about that Q shaman guy and just the events of January 6th. And again, it wasn't a matter of them talking about their own personal beliefs on what took place and insurrection and all that garbage. What it was about was just to say, look, we're on the scene. They, believe it or not, Jason and his friend, Paul, I'm forgetting his last name, who they produce and direct these things. They had interviewed that guy, the guy that dressed up with the horns and all that crap. They had interviewed that guy some months before, and so they had gotten to know him a little bit, had his phone number, all that stuff. And then they were in DC in January that year, kind of taking it in and filming the events, just as like an investigative journalist perhaps would do. And then they were seeing on TV, like at a local diner, oh my God, that's that guy we know that we interviewed. He's the Q shaman, right? So they call his number, and it turns out he still had his cell phone on. And they were like, can we talk to you about what happened? Because we're seeing you on the news. And they were the ones that got the only exclusive interview with that guy before 3 days later he was put in a federal prison. No one's seen or heard from him since. And so the point of that documentary was to talk about, look, we've got the receipts. We've got footage. We've got testimonials from on the ground. I'm physically there on the scene. I'm seeing what's happening. I'm getting footage of how the DC police are acting, how the security is reacting, how the protesters are acting, whether they're being violent or not, what rhetoric they're spewing or not. I've got the receipts. And he makes this documentary called Q Sent Me, talking about kind of that whole movement. And then the interview with the Q shaman guy. And it was meant to cast light on the fact of, again, the mainstream narrative of this is an insurrection. They tried to take over the government. It was inspired by Trump and these other actors. Look how they're beating the police, all this stuff, and how that's just not true. And whether you believe that there's any right or wrong to what the crowd is doing or not is irrelevant. I'm just simply showing you in film what you're seeing on CNN is not quite what happened. When he made that film, he basically lost everything. So again, he was paying out of his own pocket to make this. It's not, he didn't have some mega bucks, you know, he didn't have Patrick Byrne from Overstock or somebody paying him $1 million to make this thing. He's using his own capital to make these films because he just thinks it's the right thing to do. And in his mind, he's thinking, well, people in our kind of ideological sphere should be interested in this stuff because we would be interested to know what really happened, and maybe you don't think that the news is telling you the whole truth. He lost everything. They banned him from every platform imaginable. He's banned from Twitter. He banned from Twitter like 4 or 5 times. He kept on trying to come back. They keep banning him. Any mention of or link to his site for that documentary, instant ban. They banned him on YouTube, banned him on Facebook. The two that hurt him the most was they permanently banned him on Facebook. He is not allowed as a business entity associated with any of his bank accounts, credit numbers, whatever. He is not allowed to be on Facebook and use their marketing tools or business management in any sense. This guy was making $100,000 a year managing online marketing for a variety of companies. That business is gone. Boom, $100,000 a year, gone. He'll never get it back because he can't use the platform. The last one was Vimeo. He had a professional account with Vimeo that had something like several thousand hours of film rough cuts, because this guy's a documentary filmmaker. Rough cuts, B-roll, interviews. He lost the account. They deleted it all. That people like us, like even if this guy was actually literally a Nazi, we'd be like, well, you know, again, I'm no lover of, for example, our upcoming example, Nick Fuentes, but that could have been you or me. You and I could have been working on a project that we thought, man, this is going to put us on the map. We're going to be somebody's after this. And then all of a sudden that, you know, you try to send that link on Twitter and it doesn't work. And the next thing you know, you got an email in your inbox saying your account's gone. That could have been us. That could be anybody. And so to fast forward to this year's Anthem Film Festival at Freedom Fest, he had this short documentary. It's meant to be that way for viewing. It's only like 21 minutes, something like that. It's talking about Nick Fuentes. It's not really about Nick Fuentes' views on whatever bullshit Nick Fuentes said this week. What it's about is that this guy was put on a federal no-fly list, and the government seized $500,000 of his money, which they hold to this day, and he's never been charged with a crime. That's what the documentary was about. That documentary was accepted by the Freedom Fest people to air at Anthem. Again, because Jason's an old hat. He's been involved with them multiple times. They know who this guy is and that his integrity is above reproach. They had contacted him and said, can we get Nick Fuentes to come and, like, you know, be there for the screening, maybe answer some questions. Jason, because that wasn't even Jason's idea. Jason had said, sure, I can reach out to him, see if we can get him. I don't know if he will, but I'll see if he'll come. Freedom Fest, because they're just incompetent boobs, I guess, they started advertising that Nick Fuentes was going to be there. Now, maybe he would be there, but he had not yet at that point agreed to come. When they advertised that he was going to be there, the usual suspects arrived. What we would refer to as Libertarian Inc. and Conservative Inc. And that's the thing, you kind of described Freedom Fest there a little bit, and your description, I mean, I mostly agree with your description. I think the biggest difference between them and Pork Fest, other than what area of the spectrum you're on, and I mean that is derogatory as I possibly can, is Pork Fest is really more of a grassroots type of a event, whereas Freedom Fest is absolutely dominated by Conservative Inc. and Libertarian Inc. 100%. And those people started to tell Freedom Fest, we don't want that guy there. Then Freedom Fest said, oh, well, we won't have that guy. Then they said, oh, well, now that you've brought it up, we also don't want that film showing. And then they actually called Jason and said, we're getting pushback from these people, these organizations, saying they don't want your film shown because they don't, you know, bigotry, white supremacy, yada, yada, yada. There's a few interesting things that I'll leave with before I turn it back over to you. One, Jason has the motherfucking receipts. Because of what he's been through over the last couple of years, because of what he went through with Q Sent Me in that previous documentary, He learned the valuable lesson that I should record every conversation, I should save every email, I should screenshot everything that could possibly be deleted. He has a backlog of every single communication he had with that organization in any capacity and all of their representatives. They told him point blank, word for word, that they were getting pressure from these organizations to drop his film. And then when he went public and said, "Hey, these people are doing this and they're canceled," as a quick aside, they actually wanted Jason to appear and give a talk on a different day and time about cancel culture. They canceled him at Freedom Fest, but wanted him to come back and talk about how cancel culture is bad. That's just a funny little bit of irony there. So when he went public saying they did this, they immediately denied it, basically calling Jason a liar with no integrity. Of course, what does Jason do? He said, "Well, here you go. There's the file with all of our communications. Have at it, you pieces of shit." So he has the receipts. They totally did that. As another just quick side note, he hasn't screened the documentary. How do all these different organizations already have such a firm opinion on what the documentary is about and how it is, by their own words, is insufficiently critical of Fuentes and his views when none of them have seen it?
Yeah, that whole thing is ridiculous. I mean, the fact that they haven't seen the movie and they just see that name, Nick Fuentes. Oh shit, we're panicking. We gotta do something about this. And as of now, it's looking like, I mean, yeah, they basically kicked him out. They canceled the screening, and he's basically like persona non grata now. But now he's fighting back, like, no, go fuck yourself. I'm gonna do something about this. And now, I mean, I admire the guy for doing what he's doing, because, I mean, when you've been part of them, you've been working with them for a long time, associated with them, thinking, oh yeah, it's gonna be great. We're friendly, all this. And then this one movie, they're like, yeah, we don't like, it's just, it's crazy to me that one, and I'm sure when he was making it, he didn't think, oh, I bet Freedom Fest isn't gonna like this. They're probably gonna like hate me. But then, like the usual suspects of Libertarian Inc. and Conservative Inc. because they still want, they're a part of this bubble. And they hear like the cube thing. I'm even with that, they're like, yeah, I don't, because they have this narrative in their head where, I mean, yeah, we're libertarians, we don't like the government, but you can't do it like that. I mean, come on, you can't have this. And they call it, like, even like the Libertarian Inc., they'll call it an insurrection. When we're like, that's it. If it was an insurrection, the whole place would be gone. Like, what are you talking about? It would have exploded and all this, like, up in flames. What are you talking about?
It's also worth mentioning, by the way, that so just first of all, because I feel like, Jason's my friend, so I think my own bias is pretty clear. Freedom Fest, Reason, Cato, LP, all those institutions should be razed to the ground. They should salt the earth where those things existed. That's what they deserve for. I'm sorry. That's what they deserve for treating people the way they're treating Jason, is number one. And number two, I do believe Jason is going to screen the film privately to a variety of different people. Jason's got a lot of supporters. It's going to be okay. It's one of those things that it's really tough, because the moment he decided to go public with the communications and with the article he wrote, you knew that basically sealed the deal, right? He wasn't going to be invited back ever again at that point, because he spouted off. However, it needed to be said. It should be done. I applaud him for taking the stance that he did. As one more quick note, these people now, by your description, and that's a description Freedom Fest would probably welcome, this conservative libertarian festival that's like the biggest, most expensive one annually in the country, most likely, that happens in Las Vegas every year in conjunction with the film festival and everything. These people are supposed to be conservative libertarian, and people like Jason Rink are banned from participating. You want to know who one of their speakers are coming up? Andrew Yang.
Oh yeah. Oh.
Is that a conservative libertarian conference to you?
I mean, yeah. I saw they announced like John Cleese was going to be there too.
Yeah, that's very random. Yeah. I mean, of course, and Donald Trump was there like a couple of years ago or whatever it was.
Oh my God, Donald Trump was there. Holy shit! I
Yeah.
can't believe they didn't ban him. He can't be here. How dare you?
Well, I mean, like it was funny because their bullshit little statement. I mean, you know how PR is. Their little statement was in response to Rink going public about everything was that they weren't bullied by any organizations. This was an internal review. They made this decision themselves. Um, they we it's one of those everything before but in a sentence can be ignored. We respect privacy and free speech, and we understand that the documentary was about government overreach, yada yada yada, comma, but we don't platform white supremacy, and liberty is about equality. Then when they put liberty and equality in the same sentence, you just like, this is a progressive organization. Freedom for it's progressive fest. It literally is. Like there's that old phrase. I forget who it's originally contributed to because I don't research enough. But there's that phrase of any organization that's not explicitly right wing will eventually become left wing. We see that happen. Like, I'm usually one of the types of people that says, like those random old sayings, like that's a what's the word I'm looking for? Like a self
Cell phone.
yeah. Well, no, it's not a cell phone, but like self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh,
Like
okay.
if you already believe something, then when you see it, you'll apply that moniker to it. So sometimes when I hear that, I think, oh, that's not true. But then we see it over and over and over and over again. So Freedom Fest, which branded itself in the way that we discussed earlier, it wasn't explicitly right wing, and before our very eyes, it's now a progressive organization.
Well, another organization that seems to be kind of going that way is Young Americans for Liberty. But that's for a whole other
Woo!
time.
Yes, that it's same thing. If they are not if you are not unapologetically for a conservative, right wing, whatever token you want to use, set of principles, they will eventually become left wing. Yep.
All right. So to completely switch gears to talk about the last topic that we were going to discuss, I've been wanting to kind of briefly talk about this for a little while, but I don't know, for some reason I just never got around to it. So I mean, I know that you're obviously you do your show. It's too late.
Mm-hmm.
It's a talk show, late night talk show, and I'm sure you got your a lot of your inspiration from Jimmy Fallon and Stephen Colbert. I'm sure you just love those guys,
Jesus
right?
Christ. Why would you do this to me? I thought we were friends.
Oh, sorry. Whoops.
So first of all, no, but I will tell you, just to answer that question, if I was picking just one former late night host that is like the predominant inspiration, it's Craig Ferguson.
He is a good one. I do remember seeing him a few times. Yeah,
I sorely miss Craig Ferguson.
You know what's funny that you mentioned that? So okay, so what we're going to talk about is the legacy of Norm Macdonald, and it's actually funny that you mentioned Craig Ferguson, because when he announced that he was leaving, I'm pretty sure Norm Macdonald's name was one of the top names that people were like, oh, Norm Macdonald should totally be the guy to replace him. And that would have been fantastic. I would have been like, I am tuning in every single day. I don't care how late it comes on. I am watching now, or at least recording or something. I gotta watch that because that motherfucker is hilarious. Of course, he's one of, if not the best. I mean, like I think in his Wikipedia page, he's like considered. It says he's considered one of the best guests on talk shows, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And like his chemistry with David Letterman and Conan O'Brien are legendary. I mean, the
Yes.
times he was on there, they're legendary. I mean, you could literally spout off anything. Like obviously the last time he ever did stand up on a late show with David Letterman, that was classic. Him with Courtney Thorne Smith, that was classic. I mean, you can just name off all these different. My personal favorite of Norm when he was on a talk show was when he was a guest on the Conan O'Brien show. I think it was doing a Tonight Show. He was with Gordon Ramsay doing their little cooking segment. And, Gordon trying to be real serious and teaching them how to do this thing. And Norm just kept doing his little jabs. And the one that always cracks me up is when he goes, "Well, do you ever want to become a cook?" and then Gordon goes, "No, it's a chef. Women become cooks." And everyone's like, "Boo!" This is that whole thing. That's my personal favorite one.
I'll never forget. So when he was the appearance he made on Letterman, literally like the day that they announced. What made Letterman so awesome too is that if this were any other celebrity and any other issue, it would have been like in bold letters on your little card, "Do not bring up." Like, our guest says you're not supposed to talk about this, and this,
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no. That was good. I mean, that was the very first thing that came out of Letterman's mouth was, "I heard you got yourself fired. That's not right, is it?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I did." He's like, "No, that's not the truth." And they go on this whole, and of course Letterman having the history with NBC that he has and stuff. I mean, they just ripping into him, for like a whole, like a double segment of them just ripping into NBC and stuff. But I will say this: anyone could tell you there's a 0% chance that they would have ever allowed someone like Norm take over any of the shows in any of the time slots. Because could you imagine them allowing something like Norm Macdonald Live to be coming on every night at 11 o'clock? They wouldn't allow it. That would never even be discussed. He'd be off. It wouldn't matter what the ratings would be. He'd be out in 6 weeks. They wouldn't. It would either generate too much heat, or it would be the same thing as like with Weekend Update. He's a true comics comic, and if you tell him he can't do something, that's what he's going to write his whole set about the next day. He would have gotten himself fired. It's just he would have. But you're also right. Not only was he an amazing guest, but Norm was one of those that like I appreciated him more the older I got. When I was younger, I didn't realize how much of an influence he was. When I got a little bit older, I realized how much of the brainchild of so much of what was going on was his doing, and then his own kind of quirky, all shucks Canadian sort of stand up and stuff like that. I don't think anyone thinks that Norm Macdonald's like that special that's coming up for him. I don't think anyone expects that's going to get as many views as Chappelle, right? But all of those people, Letterman, Chappelle, whoever, those people thought Norm's the best.
Yeah, I mean, on Chappelle's last special, he basically dedicated it to him.
Yeah, he did.
That's crazy. And yeah, so like for me, I don't even know how I even got to liking him so much. It probably was just some random YouTube video. I'm sure it was one of his appearances on Conan or something like that. But his book, his memoir book, was really good too. And I don't know, it seemed like, yeah, he's one of those guys that just seemed like he just wanted to do whatever he wanted to do. Mm-hmm. Even within the confines of, like on Weekend Update, I'm sure they're like, "Hey, you can't say this." Like, I'm going to say it anyway. I don't care. And I mean, the fact that he probably lasted as long as he did, doing all the OJ jokes that he was doing. I mean, because that was one of the presumed reasons that he was basically let go, was because of that. But it's like he was doing that pretty much for almost this entire time he was the Weekend Update anchor. Was the fact that he was just talking about how much OJ was a murderer. Like, he's like, "No, he's guilty. I don't know what the trial should be over now. Why are we still here?"
Yeah.
And
yeah, that the first Weekend Update that they had right after that OJ was acquitted, like he had the absolute the Weekend Update started that night, and the very first thing he is breaking news: murder is now legal in the state of California. Oh my God.
And then they have to look for they have to actually try to find the killers. If you can see, if you know what this guy is, and it's like literally a picture. It's a picture of OJ. Yeah.
So speaking of that, like talking about some of the specific like pressure points, I don't know if necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily say he was before his time. I think, I don't think it wasn't so much that he was necessarily a trailblazer. It was just A, he was really good. B, he absolutely was a standard bearer for I'm not making professional decisions. They call it in football a business decision. If you're a cornerback that's only 160 pounds and a running back's coming at you full speed and you get out of the way, that's what they call a business decision because you don't want to get killed. He didn't make business decisions. He said and did whatever the hell he wanted to do. I mean, he was perfectly successful. I don't think he was broke by any stretch of the imagination other than from his gambling problem. But he didn't make business decisions. He said what a good comedian would say and do. But what few things he did that were sort of ahead of his time in a sense was, I'm sure you know that because you're such a big fan. I mean, he was making Michael Jackson pedophile jokes when, like, you couldn't even say that on TV, and he was saying it every week. Same thing with O.J. Simpson. Same thing. He was going on. You've probably seen him. He would go on a show like The View and talk about how the Clintons were murderers.
Yeah.
Like in 1998. So it's like, for you or me to say that on our podcast today, it would be funny and not even all that unexpected. For you or me to go on like Fox and Friends and say that would not necessarily be the most unheard of thing, but we probably wouldn't get invited back for being so on the nose on national television. He was saying that on daytime TV in the 90s, dude, and lived to tell the tale at that.
Yeah, and then towards the end of his life, when like Louis C.K. was going through his troubles,
and
then Norm pretty much defended him, and he was pretty much blacklisted. I think I don't know how like 100% or how much truth there is to it, but I think when all that was going on and he was kind of like Me Too'd or all that stuff.
Yeah,
he was supposed to be on Conan's show around that time, and then he was basically like kicked off because of that, and he never went back on there, which is such a shame when you think about the appearance that he went on there. And when Conan was ending his show at TBS, I mean, he would have been like the perfect guest to have on at least on one of the final shows, but he wasn't there because of all of that, because he was pretty much defending. You're not supposed to defend Louis C.K. Don't you know he did something terrible? But he was like, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he was basically saying, I mean, Louis C.K., what did he do? Like, he did this. Okay, well, I mean, people murdered someone, so I don't know why. I don't know if that was basically what he said, but that was pretty much the gist of it, was that this is what we're getting mad about. Like, I don't know. So, I mean, that whole thing, I think, was pretty sad, especially when you think too, he went on The View to apologize for his comments. And people were saying, is he trolling? Because he was like being really serious and just kind of saying, I'm sorry for the things that I said. Or it was just the way that because it was different. Like, it wasn't the usual Norm performance, because usually he's trying to make everyone laugh with his usual way. And I mean, to this day, I think people kind of don't know, like, is he really apologizing, or is he kind of, I don't know what's going on here. And I think that was like part of his charm, was the fact that, like, with his movies, he was just being Norm. Like, even if he was supposed to act, he was still going to be Norm Macdonald. He was like, nobody was going to say that Norm Macdonald was this amazing actor. He was just going to be in Dirty Work, for example. I mean, that's like obviously probably his most famous movie he was in, because he was the lead. That's just Norm Macdonald being Norm Macdonald. I mean, if you're trying to have him be some gangster, like, that's not going to work, Yeah.
He Teachers is another one. So, we recently just went through that whole news cycle there where everyone was calling everyone a groomer, and all the teachers are groomers, and Disney are groomers, and they're all pedophiles, and they all knew Epstein. And you know what? Hey, it's probably true. But Norm Macdonald 20 years ago was doing stand-up bits where he was saying, man, I don't understand why they always give Catholic priests such a hard time. Teachers fuck way more kids than priests do. Like, he was saying that way back then. Of course, I mean, in some sense, you can't get mad because statistically, he's just correct, right? Like he's just right about what he's saying. But it's the fact that he would say it. He was saying it in a room where there was people heckling him because they're school teachers and or work for public schools. And then he would just like point blank point them out in the audience and say, "Why is that pedophile so mad at me?" You know, like it's like, so that. So again, it's like he was doing things that you and I would do today to be funny. He was doing it when it took a lot more balls to do it. And he stood to lose a lot more. It's easy for me to go on It's Too Late and say that and then, move on with my life. He absolutely could have been, commercially bigger, and he wasn't because he was perfectly content with who he was. And I think that's part of Norm's legacy too, is that outside of being a great comedian, and great writer, he also was a surprisingly grounded, humble individual. And so for him to have ever done a project where someone handed him $1 million, he was like, "Oh, that's more money than some random bloke from my small town should have. So I'll just I don't know if you ever saw any of he lived in a really small apartment and still hung out with his mom and mostly just watched sports and bet on games and stuff. Like he didn't live extravagantly. A lot of his friends, like the Adam Sandlers and David Spades of the world, it was twisting his arm to ever get him to go out and go to the club, go party with them or whatever, because he just wasn't that kind of guy. And yet he was this massive font of critique and humor that I think in a sort of backhanded sort of way, that's why so many of those other folks in the industry loved him, is because they were like, he's not playing the game. Here I am with a publicist and a marketing agent, and I'm reading talking points off of a fucking note card every time I make an appearance. This guy literally does whatever the fuck he wants, and he's living the dream. Why am I not doing that? I think that they envied him in that regard.
Yeah. So I guess the last thing that I want to say to wrap this up about that is when him passing, and then of course with Bob Saget and Gilbert Gottfried also passing.
Louis Anderson too.
Oh yeah, Louis Anderson. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much around the same time.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of that's a dying breed of that type of comic where maybe more so Norm and Gilbert Gottfried too, because Gilbert Gottfried also would kind of just went with the stand up and would just do whatever he would do. Like I heard one story, I think I heard Jim Florentine say this, where he was saying that he saw him do stand up one time and he did a joke. It didn't do well. And then I think he was doing some other jokes, and then he did that same joke again, knowing he basically bombed, is what the whole story was. But then he went up to Chin, like, dude, Gilbert, you bombed. Are you okay? He's like, dude, that was great. What are you talking about? Them booing me? I got paid already. Who cares? That whole mentality.
Yep. Gilbert Gottfried will be legendary for all time for being the guy that told the first 9/11 joke, right? He told a 9/11 joke in New York at the first public event after 9/11. He set the bar. That's one of the kind of the golden rules of comedy, is it's never, never too soon enough. Gilbert Gottfried exemplified that. Him telling that 9/11 joke, and you know what? Not only did he tell the joke, but if you go back and watch the clip, was there some uneasy tension in the room? Of course there was, but I wouldn't say it bombed. I feel like people were like, "This is who can do it. He's opening the door, right? Someone's got to do it. Someone's got to fall on their sword and tell the joke so that we can say, well, look, I'm not the one that started it. Gilbert Gottfried started it," and he was perfectly content to do that. That didn't bother him in the slightest. But you're definitely right that there's a certain generation. For some reason, it made me think of Bill Burr, and the reason why it made me think of Bill Burr is that a lot of people like Bill Burr. I like Bill Burr; he's a funny guy. He has a lot more of that old school kind of mentality to him, but he is also in Hollywood today. He's on The Mandalorian, and he's doing movies, and he was in Breaking Bad and stuff like that. And I've heard him say in interviews This is how I know this is how I know they respected people like Gilbert and Norm so much, is that to hear Bill, because a lot of people in their minds, they think Bill Burr is like that. They think, oh, this is a guy who will say anything. He doesn't play by the rules. He's a maverick. That's not really true. Because for one, if it was, he wouldn't be in a Disney show. That's just number one. And number two, he himself has said that he envies those guys because they're willing to do that. But that for him, you know, he had a kid not that long ago. He's still got young children, and he hasn't. Some of those guys were making their bucks like in the 90s when Bill Burr was, you know, riding in the back of the bus with other people traveling around trying to get on stage. Like he's a household name today, but he hasn't quite had his full 15 minutes of fame yet. So I think for people like Bill Burr, his attitude is, let me finish my 15 minutes, let me make my money, and then I'll go say verbatim anything Norm or Gilbert would have said. It would have been fine. But let me make sure my kids are taken care of and stuff like that. Which in some sense, because this is another thing that's kind of, this applies not just to comedy, but like to some of our friends and family and people to Jason Rink, to everything we've talked about all night in cancel culture, is I used to be one of those libertarian types who would get mad at people because they would hide behind an avatar, not use their real name, not be willing to take a stand, draw a line somewhere, and put their money where their mouth was. But and while I still wish more people would, it's not that I haven't completely moved from that position. I do at least understand that, look what happened to those people. Look what happened to Jason. Look what happened. I mean, you see this every day, all the time. Look what happens to these people when they say and do the wrong thing. And so, not to sound terribly condescending, but I think a fairly condescending way to put it is, sometimes the people that are highest on their high horse about being willing to sacrifice everything don't have a lot to offer. It's a whole lot different for someone who has, you know, a lifelong career, millions of dollars to lose, for them to take a stand than it is for someone, you know, for the cashier at Kmart. So not that, you know, all life is sacred, even Kmart cashiers, but I think you see what I'm saying, that, you know, do I wish that Bill Burr would just go all out on Hollywood 24/7 like that one time Ricky Gervais did at the Academy Awards or whatever? Of course I would. But if he looked me in the eye and said, I gotta make sure that my kid's college fund is paid for first, I would be like, hey, I get it. Because we live in a world, because Bill Burr's not stupid, and he knows that we live in a world where when the day comes that he decides to fire his mouth off, that'll be the fucking end of him. He knows that.
Yeah. So we can go and end it there. Alan, go ahead and let people know where they can find you and your work. I meant to introduce you to like kind of let you introduce, but you kind of did that in the middle of that. So, but anyway, go ahead and let people know where they can find you and your work.
I am the host of It's Too Late with Alan Mosley, which is a late night talk show because I'm a retard. I think it's the only. I think it's the best late night talk show in America compared to the garbage that's on TV. It's definitely the only one hosted by a non-communist. We're on your favorite podcasting platform of choice if you're into binge listening to things, but you really need to watch the show. Like, why do I even bother doing all these graphics and stuff and video if no one watches the show? You can get us on every single platform with Alan Mosley TV. Facebook, Alan Mosley TV. Twitter, @Alan Mosley TV. YouTube, /Alan Mosley TV. And Odyssey, just search Alan Mosley TV.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Alan, for coming on. And thank you for watching and listening. And have a good one.